Hello and welcome everyone. Today we have an EdTalk, a webinar about education finance leaders and how they survived the pandemic and managed the cost of technology. My name is Carl Horvath. I'm the president of Campus Consortium, a national association of educational institutions that work together. Most of the topics that we work with are revolving around technology, but we are expanding into many other areas and collaborations with partners and institutions. And just want to give a shout out to some of our attendees today, give you an idea of who's here. We have institutions from across the entire country, both large, small, public, and private. We even have an institution, university from Saudi Arabia in attendance, and welcome. Some of the institutions have a broad representation of roles that are with us today also, and that is, of course, we have some CIOs attending, we have CFOs, we have academic folks, we have procurement folks. So it's a good representation of many different roles, and the financial discussion really does involve everyone. So that's the purpose of today's presentation, is to get everybody comfortable with the discussion of finances and technology. I see that we have a few institutions out there that are coming back. There's Mercer County Community College, my friends at Mercer County, welcome Jill. And we have St. Bonaventure University, we have Bucknell University, Middlesex College, we have community colleges, we have some vendors, we have Tamberlini Group is with us, and SoftDocs, and a few other vendors. So welcome to everyone who's in attendance, and we'll have a good conversation because we have an excellent and distinguished panel today of guests. And let me just move on by first introducing Campus Consortium. Campus Consortium is a technology association that's been around since 2003. And we, in the past year, have really been growing in our services and who we serve, and welcome anyone who's interested in joining. Also, special thanks to our sponsors. And if you're a vendor who's in attendance today, we would love to speak with you if you're interested in working with Campus Consortium and supporting our members. Special thanks to CACUBO and WACUBO today, Central Association of College and University Business Officers and the Western Association of College and University Business Officers. We have leaders from both organizations here today, and we'll tell you more about that when we get to past the initial introduction here and when we introduce our guests. I'd like to start out with a poll question, and we'll give the audience opportunity to participate and interact with us. And we're happy to answer any questions. We do have a Q&A panel. Please submit any questions or feedback or input into that panel, and we would be happy to have the panelists respond to your questions. Our first poll question today is, has the pandemic impacted the overall procurement process and how technology is purchased at your institution? So the answers would be yes, partially, or no. Yes, some people have instituted new processes and procedures and totally changed how they acquire, not just technology, but everything that's purchased on campus. Some have made temporary changes, and others may be going back to the way they've always done purchasing and procurement. I'd like to just kind of set the conversation up, and our three guests today really have a view on the finances of education, procurement, and balancing budgets. We have Brad Dan, and Marty, all from educational institutions. And today, we have a number of educational institution attendees, not just higher education, but also K-12 school districts. And, it doesn't matter what part of education you're in, you still have to procure technology and other resources for your institution. These items here are just items from the news and some reports, NBC News. We have McKinsey and Company that many people are familiar with. But the common theme is that the impacts of the pandemic and social and cultural changes have really changed education and requiring greater dependency on technology and the way we do business as institutions. There's a term called technical debt when we do software development, and we can have some similarities between financial debt and technical debt. Technical debt is not planning your project and making it as effective as it could be. And we really kind of have to take that sensibility when we are, managing technology and other resources at the institutions. And so here's quick results of our attendees who have responded. It looks like, yes, and partially, but mostly people, about 43% have not really changed their processes and procedures, and may probably made adjustments. But 29% have made some significant changes, 29% partially. So most people had to make some adjustments. Some more of this background information, technical procurement, has really been impacted by the pandemic and supply chain issues. Here's McKinsey and Company report that provides some insight to that. Also, EDUCAUSE, many of you may be familiar with EDUCAUSE. It's a national education technology association, and their research shows, some of the, can provide us some insight on the expenditures of finances on technology and how it's managed, both from a infrastructure perspective, but also from a employee or a human resources perspective. And we'll be speaking to all that, not just technology, but the state of finances with our guest panelists. Before we introduce our first panelist, I would like to ask the audience to respond to another question, and that is, are technology investments vetted only by the CIO or IT? Or is it their sole responsibility for approvals and the acquisition of technology? Or is it shared with the CFO, or is it exclusively a financial process that is not approved by IT? So all technology purchases are approved by the CIO, or it depends on the purchase, or IT really can't make any purchases unless it's approved by finance. And, we've seen, I've talked to many institutions where their processes and procedures have changed, and not just for IT, but for many areas in the institution. There really has to be a new way to do business because of the impacts of the state of education, but also pandemic impacts have caused people to really pull back and make some changes. So as the audience finishes answering that, Paul, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Brad Baca. Brad is the 14th president of Western Colorado University. Congratulations, Brad, on your appointment. And he joined Western in 2002 as vice president for finance and administration, and served as executive vice president and chief operating officer from 2012 to 2022, and as interim president in 2013 to 14. Whether it's leading campus-wide strategic initiatives, serving on a statewide task force, or representing Western at the state capitol, Mr. Baca has always demonstrated passionate stewardship of Western's mission and values, and a strong dedication to student success. Prior to joining Western, Mr. Baca served over 3 years as Director of Budgets for the Colorado Community College System, and as a budget and policy analyst on the staff of former Colorado Governor Roy Romer. Brad Baca also serves as the president of the Western Association of College and University Business Officers, WACUBO, and is on the board of National Association of College and University Business Officers, NACUBO, and is advisor to the Colorado Commission on Higher Education. And before I hand that over to Brad, I just wanted to share the results of our last poll, our technology investments vetted only by the CIO. And it looks like a majority of our responses show that it depends on the purchase. There's certain things that the CIO can purchase, but others that may impact a broader part of the university or college or institution may have to be in consultation with finance, and about 29% are still, running things through the IT function in their institution. Well, thank you to the audience and the attendees for participating in those polls. We'll have one more a little bit later. But Brad, thank you for joining us today and being part of this panel. We really are looking for you to provide some perspective on the big picture, because you have a view into that with your role at WACUBO, but also as working with your institution as originally a finance person in a leadership role, and now you're president. So welcome, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Carl, and thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be with Campus Consortium and to talk about these topics of pandemic impacts and kind of how we're coming out of it. And it's kind of interesting when Carl first asked me to do this, which has been a couple of weeks ago, I was still in the role of executive vice president. So I'm kind of still straddling both sides here right now. I'm not officially taken over the reins here yet at Western, but hopefully can provide some perspective at a more of a 30,000-foot level, and hopefully provide some good information. Carl, could you maybe move to the next slide? To help me kind of organize my thoughts. And so, as I thought about this topic, and particularly the title of this session, what's of more interest to me is kind of how are we going to survive beyond the pandemic? Because I think when we kind of got into the pandemic, I thought as institutions generally, we showed remarkable resiliency, remarkable adaptability to making changes. And then, most of us have been fortunate enough to get significant support from the federal government in terms of recovery dollars that have really helped kind of bridge that gap over the last 2 years, at least financially. And so for me, it's as we start to come out of that, as we start to lose those resources, it's how are we going to survive beyond the pandemic? And the institutional challenges that we face 2 years ago, prior to going into the pandemic, still exist, and things that we're going to have to be very attentive to as institutions of higher education. And the first of those is kind of just the student enrollment and the expectations of our student population these days. Kind of the ongoing, as I see it, challenges for institutions are demographic. We know we have less numbers of traditional age college students working their way through high school that we're going to be able to serve in the next few years. We know they're more diverse. We know they're more first generational students, and we know they're more economically constrained. That's not really new information and not something that came out of the pandemic, but it's something we're going to continue to have to be thoughtful about in terms of how are we going to bring those students onto our campuses, into our educational programs, and get them the education they're desiring. But you layer on top of that right now, we're all kind of working through our recruitment cycle, anxious about what this next fall portends for us. And there's still a ton of uncertainty, not just related to the pandemic and what the next wave might be, but also you have the war in Ukraine, you have high inflation. And what we're finding is that more and more students and their families are tentative about enrolling for this next fall. And so this means that it's going to take more financial resource to get them enrolled, and that it's going to take more services to get these students to the finish line in graduation. And this includes what I think all of us are experiencing on our higher ed campuses, which is more and more demand for mental health services that have driven by the isolation that was created by the pandemic. And so from a financial perspective, if you're a state-supported institution, you're probably dealing with unreliable levels of state support, if not diminishing. In the state of Colorado, in last fiscal year, they cut state appropriations by 58%. Thankfully, we were able to have some CRF funds backfill that for that year. And we're in a fortunate state, Daniel and I, that we have a strong economy. And so we've recovered quickly. And so appropriations have been restored, plus some, but the thinking is how long can that last, right? Before the next recession or some other thing happens that, impacts our economy. If you're a private institution, I was just looking last night at I know the CACUBO's tuition discounting survey is kind of a perennial and well-received piece of research that they provide to members. And it's not yet out for this year, but last year showed that tuition discounting continues to reach new levels of highs. We're now at about 54% on terms of our tuition discounting. And so you have to kind of ask yourself, how sustainable is that? What are we going to do to make sure that we can sustain our operations? And then finally, I think what we're all experiencing, this might be something that came out of the pandemic, is just increasing challenges in recruiting and retaining quality faculty and staff. We all talk about the Great Resignation. Well, as an industry, I think we're experiencing an unprecedented level of turnover and vacancy. And we're finding that filling those positions is growing more and more challenging as institutions. And I think what's kind of making that more challenging is just the general inflationary pressures, where our traditional levels of compensation that we've offered in the past are no longer adequate to bring in faculty and staff. And for many of our communities, you add to this housing, both affordability and inventory, particularly here in the Mountain West. I'm sure Daniel has experienced this in Denver. We're experiencing it in Gunnison. It is becoming a major obstacle. We can offer a position to a faculty or a staff member, they can accept, and then they come to Gunnison and figure out they can't live here. These are things that we're going to have to continue as an industry to tackle and think about. Finally, and I'm really interested to see how this plays out over the next few years. And I think we're experiencing a shift in expectations of our workforce as they begin to get populated with kind of late stage millennials and early stage Gen Z employees. They're all digital natives. So, technology is a big component of their daily lives. And I think they're bringing to the work environment differing levels of expectations of how we work and how we work together and how work intersects with their lives. And so, when I think about WACUBO, one of the things we're really trying to do as a professional organization is to bring in these emerging professionals and have sessions with them and get them connected and networked with one another and help us understand, what are some of the needs that they see, what are some of the desires that they see to make their work more fulfilling. So how might we address some of these challenges? I think, partnerships is going to be a key component to that. I think there's a natural tendency for institutions of higher education to feel like we have to respond to every market shift to try to become all things to all people. And we all know that this often results in spreading resources too thin, because as an industry, we are not particularly good at addressing the question of what are we not going to do, or what are we going to stop doing. So rather than trying to become experts or even proficient in the delivery of content, perhaps a better way for us to be responsive to market demands is to partner with other institutions who are the experts in those types of realms. And I'll give you an example of one thing that Western has done, or actually two things that we've done that I think are stuff that has really helped the institution. We just recently partnered with CU, University of Colorado, and their engineering program to deliver engineering programs on our campus here at Western, where students come to Western, they're Western students for 2 years, they transfer to CU, but stay here. We were fortunate enough to get an $80 million donation from a donor to build a new facility to house an engineering program. So they stay here, but they become CU students, and they get then a CU degree, and it's a degree from a top 10 engineering school in the nation. So, we're still in the infancy of that. We're in year 3 of that, but what we're finding is it's a high demand program, engineering. So it's bringing a lot of students to our campus. And I think it's elevating the brand of Western, not just by having that relationship. So I think we're able to leverage that. The other thing I think we need to be looking at we need to be looking at partnerships beyond just the classroom. Are there partnerships in the administrative and student services realm that we should be considering that could either elevate service or reduce our costs? One of the things that we're proud of here, and I see Matt McGlamory is on from Fort Lewis College. He's the CIO over there. Western, Fort Lewis, another regional Colorado institution, and Adams State University down in Alamosa, Colorado, 3 rural institutions partnered together to present a project to the state to migrate our ERP from our dated Banner system to a new Workday platform. It is a program that none of the 3 of us could do alone. But by partnering together, we were able to capture economies of scale that we didn't have by going alone. So we were getting better pricing. And since we're similar types of institutions, we're working together to implement that. The state loved it. And they have consistently held up us as the model that this is what institutions across the state of Colorado need to be doing to help our students, help better deliver our administrative programs and those types of things. On curricular innovations, what we consistently, increasingly are hearing from our prospective students and their families is that there are 3 things they're focused on: cost, time, and return on investment. In fact, in the state of Colorado, we're expanding the definition of student success to include what they're calling economic opportunity realization, which essentially means, are these students getting jobs? So we must continue to explore how we deliver high quality curriculum that's at a cost effective and supports a reasonable time to completion. At Western, we have strong programs, 3+2 programs, where you can get a master's degree in 5 years. We're working with partners in the community colleges to do something similar, where it's a 2+1+2 type program. Enterprise diversification is another thing that I think we should look at. As I mentioned before, while we can't be all things to all people, what are some of the ways that we can diversify our offerings and revenue streams? But it has to be consistent with our missions and additive to the campus portfolio. So one of the things that we're doing here on our campus is we just recently launched an adult degree completion program. There's well over 750,000 Coloradans, adults who have some college but no degree. Is there room for Western to play in that particular realm? And then finally, one of the things that I think the pandemic has taught us is that we can work remotely and be productive and be responsive. But we have to be careful that we don't compromise the student experience through this. Here at Western, we did adopt a flexible workplace policy, but as a small campus, what we found is it's critical that we have people on campus because we don't want it to feel like it's a ghost town here. So there are going to be some programs that are student facing that are not going to be eligible to do that. But, actually one of the areas that we see kind of good responsiveness to this particular policy is our IT program, because they're less student facing and can kind of do their work in remote places. So what is kind of the role of technology in all this from my perspective and my experience? From an educational perspective, and I believe some of my other panelists might be talking about this, through the pandemic, we've, I think, developed this expectation among students that we offer both in person and online. And while our students, at least here at Western, are very, they want to be here and they want to be in person. They come to Western because they like the environment that we offer here. But we're learning that they now also want to be able to have the option to take an online course here and there. And so we have to be able to deliver on that. On student support, given some of the challenges that we have in staffing, we've had to go out to places like telehealth to deliver mental health resources to our students. So kind of getting them connected through online portals and communities like that has been something that we're seeing. And then as I talked about the ERP conversion, I'm seeing a changing nature of the IT work that we do, particularly as we move more resources to the clouds. We used to staff heavily on programmers and those types of IT professionals. Now we're moving more to kind of business analysts and instructional technologists, people who are working with software programs to better understand them and how we might leverage them to become more efficient and more better deliver services to our students, and then teaching that to our faculty and our staff on how to utilize those. There are several things that are going on, but those are some of my thoughts around this topic, and I appreciate, and again, the opportunity to talk to you today, and hope to be able to answer any questions you might have.
Brett, thank you. That was a great overview, and it really helps bring perspective on kind of the bigger picture on how, what is affecting the issues that we're seeing. And I think you hit on two that are notably big issues that I'm seeing more and more in my conversations with colleges, universities, and school districts, is the collaboration on projects, and coming together. And we heard in reading in the, I guess, the Chronicle of Higher Education years ago about, this is even before the pandemic, about institutions maybe merging or, avoiding to go out of business. They would have to work with other institutions. And now that's really happening. And we're actually seeing that successfully happen, where multiple institutions can work together, yet retain their own identity. And that's really important, because every institution's got a mission and goals and objectives. Has that, you've been able to preserve that with your partnership?
Yes, yeah, and that's been a critical component of it, is maintaining our distinctiveness, maintaining our own identity through the process. But that, has also created some challenges that we're still trying to kind of work through. Like, for instance, in the CU program, we don't get graduation credit for those students because they graduate from CU. Well, how do we think about that different to incent partnerships more like that? Because you don't want to penalize institutions who show, might get hit from a graduation rate metric or a retention rate metric. And so these are the kind of conversations I'm having at the statewide level. They may need to be happening at the national level too, if they really want us to, promote this type of stuff.
Well, that's yeah, and a lot more of this is going to develop as we move on. I think you mentioned that in the beginning of your talk. It's be interesting to see how this all plays out over the next weeks, months, and years. So thank you, Brad. Here's our final poll question for our audience. In the near future, does your institution anticipate spending more or less on academic and administrative technology? More, less, or the same? If you would just take a few minutes to answer this poll question, that'd be great. Kind of, in the days of limited funding and limited resources, but yet the increased dependency on technology, as Brad mentioned, we're doing more flexible work environments and learning environments. What does the investment of technology look like at your institution? I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and his name is Marty Mickey, and he is the National Louis University's Vice President of Finance and has served the university in various roles since 2004. He's responsible for the university's financial operations, including financial reporting, general accounting, budgeting, payroll, accounts payable, purchasing, and treasury operations, as well as facilities and operations. Marty worked 14 years with Wisconsin Central Transportation Corporation and Canadian National Railway, holding various roles, including treasurer and U.S. regional controller. He also was an auditor with the international accounting firm and specialized in colleges and regulated industries. Marty Mickey serves as a board member of the Central Association of College and University Business Officers, CACUBO. And Marty, thank you for joining us today. And you too have extensive experience and provided a lot of service across your career and continue to do so. So love to hear from you, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Carl. Did you want to review the results of your polling question first?
Sure. Yeah, very quickly, in the near future, does your institution anticipate spending more or less? Mostly the answers are more. Some are less, and some are about the same. So it looks like 50, 60, 70% of folks will be investing something into technology as we move ahead. It's hard not to. But resources can also dictate whether you do or you don't. So thanks for that time, Marty. Take it away, please.
Thank you. Yeah, if you could go to the next slide, Carl. I am, as Carl mentioned, I'm on the board of CACUBO, and I think these webinars are a wonderful way to keep engaged and knowledgeable about different topics and hear about how other institutions are surviving and getting through this pandemic. We pivoted when the pandemic started because we weren't going to have our same level of programming at CACUBO. Our annual meeting that first year was canceled. The next year we had our annual meeting virtually. It just wasn't the same kind of engagement. So we started putting together monthly webinars, and they've been a very good way to stay engaged and in touch with our constituents. So I think these are great. For us, and I think Brad mentioned this as well, and I'm sure that Daniel mentioned this as well, that the HERF funding, the funding from the federal government was a huge benefit to us and really allowed us to make some of the changes that we needed to make to pivot into the online learning that started when the pandemic started back in March of 2020. Initially, the funding requirements associated with HERF were a little bit limited, but they certainly addressed the needs that we had to make sure that we could pivot and provide that online education. There were limitations such as providing costs that were in addition to what you would have normally had incurred in the past to allow you to provide education to students virtually and to provide the supports that those students might need to help them get through the pandemic. And for us, that meant in beefing up our platforms, our servers, to enable us to provide the capacity that we needed as we moved everybody to online. We had already provided a good source of platforms and infrastructure to do this, but this just enabled us to make it that much better as we were pivoting. And besides the technology side, HERF did a lot of other things as well. It allowed us to pivot and go into virtual care, provide those kind of services to our students as they were remote, and we didn't have the same level of counseling services available on campus that the students could benefit from. So they were able to do this virtual care. And we also utilized some of the funds to do more outreach to students, make sure that we tried to meet them where they had their needs. If they didn't have laptops, or if their laptops were having problems, we pivoted our IT department to provide that support to the students so that they could get what they needed. And we also found some needs for hotspots for internet, and not all the students had the access to the internet that they might need. So we were able to pivot and provide some information or for some resources in those areas as well to help the students. So certainly the HERF was a huge benefit for us. And, it's as it's kind of evolved through the process, we've been able to use HERF on other things to help with our students, such as debt forgiveness through what we call the persistence grants. And we've been able to use obviously the student grant portion of the HERF money to help provide assistance to students that have been impacted by the pandemic. So that those benefits from the federal government were just huge and can't be understated. And obviously the challenge for us and other institutions is going to be, as these HERF funds are finishing up, to continue on and be able to survive and thrive and do the things that we've been doing consistently, and try to reimagine a little bit where we don't have the funding sources that we previously had because of HERF, and to try to provide those sources and those resources in other ways. For us, we had already made a pretty substantial investment in the online curriculum before the pandemic started. We had put away at least $1 million a year for several years in trying to upgrade our curriculum so that it was online as well as face-to-face. We had made a pretty big investment and commitment to this area, so that when the pandemic hit, for us, it was pretty seamless as far as moving over and providing teaching instruction to students through an online platform. A lot of institutions use that HERF money to rewrite some of their curriculum to provide, to enable it to be online. We fortunately were not in that situation, and had many of our programs already developed online, so it enabled us to pivot and we were able to handle that pretty seamlessly. So that was a benefit for us. And I think, as you look at this going forward, online and hybrid are here to stay. I don't think we're ever going to get back to the way we were. At least we are. We are a commuter school. We have very few residential students. We serve about 10,000 students total annually, of which about 150 are residential. Most of ours are commuter students, so they really have embraced this online teaching. And I just think that we're going to be in this situation for the long term. We have, even though we've started to come back, last fall, more face-to-face, we've given most of our students the option of face-to-face or online, and many have continued to choose the online option. It's just easier for them. As I said, many of our commuter students, they're working, and so they have jobs, and it's just easier to, hook in from their computer and then go about their working days as well. So I think, from my standpoint, this is just going to be something we continue to have more and more of. And, as we look at the IT department, I think the importance of that department is only going to grow. I was interested in the last polling question. I was surprised that it was on 100% of our respondees didn't say that they're going to spend more and more on online or IT resources. I just think that in this day and age, this is going to be a huge area of investment for us. And it's not just, keeping our students happy, it's also to make sure we have a protected infrastructure. I think about the concept of cybersecurity. I don't think it's, if you're going to get hit by a cybersecurity hack one of these days, it's when you're going to get hacked. So we all have to really buckle down and look at our infrastructure for IT and support it. read many articles recently where the CIO compensation is becoming more than the CFO compensation, just because of the importance of what that role does and provides the institution. So I encourage us all to realize that and make sure that we have the resources that we need in this area. And obviously the Great Resignation has had an impact on the IT department for us and others. These guys are really, really marketable. They can pretty much name their price a lot of times. So it's important that you provide the right level of resources to the IT department, and obviously, look at the size of your shop relative to, your needs, and make sure that you've got it right sized and providing the students the support that they need. And another thing that we used our HERF monies for, finally, that I think has been huge, and I think it's only going to be growing and growing, is converting our classrooms to being dual purposed, so that the faculty can teach on site and online at the same time. We've made a big investment in what are called these D10 units, which have the audio and visual built into them, and flat screens. And we've put them in all of our classrooms to give those classrooms the adaptability to be able to multi-function both online and face-to-face. And they've been received very favorably. And now we don't have to worry about the 5 or so students that might be opting out or whatever to online, or have to just carve up sections and have class sizes of 5. We can keep our class sizes of 15, knowing that 5 will be remote anyway, and we can just teach them through these virtual classrooms. And I think it's been a wonderful thing, and I think that investment is going to be huge for institutions going forward as well. So this area is just going to continue to evolve like this pandemic has evolved, and I just think it's going to be so important that we can keep the focus on IT and make sure that we have the investments and resources in this area going forward.
Thank you, Marty. That's, you touched on something that Brad mentioned earlier, and that is, about the Great Resignation. How are you going to find employees who are resigning to go to other, maybe more lucrative opportunities? At the same time, you were talking about creating hybrid environments. So investment has been maybe traditionally in your physical on-campus environment, and now it's you have to offer both environments, as you said, online and on campus. So aside from partnering with another institution helps alleviate maybe some expense and access to expertise and some supports. But how do you then change a compensation model to attract the talent that you need? You mentioned, and Brad mentioned, counseling, right? Remote counseling of students. Well, there's FERPA, HIPAA, issues and compliance and security. So, you have to ensure that there is, that students are protected. So how are you going to juggle all these things with the right staffing, to make sure that you're safe and compliant?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to have a really good relationship with your CIO and make sure that you understand his pain points, and obviously, keeping and retaining talent is huge for him. Obviously, we all do the different things as far as trying to encourage and retain our talent, from the benefit packages that we offer to the compensation we provide, to making sure that we're flexible to the extent we can with the work-life balance that those employees have, making sure that they have the ability to work remotely, since it's becoming a norm now more than the exception. We have to make sure that we're keen to what those employees need, and if it's 3 days a week, for us, 3 days a week is more the norm in the office versus where it used to be 5 days a week. So, and the IT area can be even less in the office, I think. So you have to be kind of flexible and work with those employees. It's so important. You don't want to be left empty-handed by the IT department leaving. You really need those folks these days more than ever.
Yes, and so and that this, I'm sure, goes with other student services and other departments, and online learning. So now faculty are teaching remotely. Everybody is changing their models to meet these new needs and expectations. And I think Brad also mentioned earlier about millennials and Gen Zs. They're digital natives, expecting their banking, their healthcare services, retail, entertainment is all online, and why isn't academics online as well? So yeah, the lot of changes coming up. So thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Daniel Coors. Dan Coors joined Colorado Christian University in January of 2010 as Executive Vice President and CFO. Coors oversees all of the university's financial and business operations, in addition to the College of Adult and Graduate Studies. Prior to coming to CCU, Coors was an officer and CFO of several public, private, and nonprofit organizations. He has also served as a Denver partner in a national CPA firm specializing in real estate, banking, governmental, and nonprofit auditing. Coors holds an active CPA certificate in Colorado and an inactive certificate in Kansas. He holds a Bachelor of Science, summa cum laude, in accounting from Oklahoma Christian University. Coors is a member of Mission Hills Church in Littleton, Colorado, and he and his wife, Tomasa, have 4 children and 9 grandchildren. You are a busy man, Dan. So welcome, and I'd love to hear your perspective on the issues we're talking about today.
Thank you, Dr. Horvath, and thank you for the invitation. I have just a few minutes, and I want to keep us on time, so I'll be brief, but it would appear from a variety of people that are in the audience that the only thing we have in common is we all have students. Yeah, well, except for maybe the vendors don't have students, but Colorado Christian is different probably than others, but we're all different. I mean, we have a very small residential campus, about 1,500 students. Living in the dorms and eating in the cafeteria and that sort of thing. And then we have 7,000 online students. So the number of students online vastly outnumbers the number of traditional students. And that's just the composition of CCU. And we've been in the online space for many, many years. And it is when a worldwide pandemic comes along, it's quite a blessing to have so many people that know exactly what to do. And it had virtually no effect on the online program, as well, except for people, losing their jobs and not being able to be attending classes, but that affected everyone. But as far as the traditional school goes, we were able to pivot overnight to a remote for our traditional students, and it was. Actually, the biggest amount of transition was not students so much as it was the employees. I mean, we're young, we're not the size of many universities, but we've got 600 employees, and of that 600, maybe 10 work remotely. Not very many, and then on March 16th of 2020, all of a sudden, everyone is working remotely. And on March 17th of 2020, we're in business. We didn't even miss a beat. And I think that's because of the skill of our IT department, who are phenomenal, and also the adaptability of being online anyway. We know how to create community online. We know how to create partnerships. So it was a pretty natural transition. But matter of fact, if you jump to the next slide, Carl, we go overnight from nobody working online to we now have 318 that are completely online, 84 that are hybrid. People like me, I like Marty, I come to the office a couple, 3 days a week, and then completely on site 212. They're the minority, which is very unusual. So if you jump back to the previous slide, you get there's no way to generalize the effects of the pandemic on institutions because it varies so much between state to state. I mean, New York State dealt with things differently than Colorado, differently than California, Illinois. I mean, the state rules sometimes it's well known what happened in Florida versus say New York. So in Colorado, it was pretty much a county thing, so that was fairly easy. But a lot of it depends on a lot of the adjustment depend on risk tolerance. I mean, we had both of the institution and of the students themselves. I mean, we had online students, I mean, in-seat students that we had an in-seat student that went to OSHA and said, "Is this something I need to read here?"
Nope, nope, keep going. Sorry about that.
We had a student go to OSHA and say he was in an unsafe working environment because they weren't, all of them wearing masks. Well, they were, but there were times where they weren't. And then we had a parent pull their daughter out of the in-seat program because we were wearing masks. I mean, you just can't win. And so you've got to do the best you can. And but we had incredibly flexible faculty in the in-seat program, and it was an easy adjustment. But going forward, I mean, that's during COVID. And now if you jump 2 slides, so going forward, we had this massive shift to online staff. And these departments don't mean anything to you all, but the CUS is our traditional program. 2% of them are remote. Our CAGS, which is called the College of Adult and Graduate Studies, that's where all our graduate programs, almost 90-some% of those are online. 90% of our staff are now also online. We have an academy program, which is online dual enrollment with high schools. 23% of those people are online. Business affairs, 64%, and so on. So this is going forward. This is going to stay, and this is permanent. Right now, we're paying payroll taxes in 46 states. As small as we are, we still are all over the country, and what it's done is opened up a hiring pool nationwide, and it has really been to our benefit because as Brad mentioned, housing is really hard. Before the pandemic, we had a professor come here from Tennessee, accept the job, drove out here to Tennessee, and said, "I can't afford the housing in Colorado." So he had to retract his acceptance of the position and went back to Tennessee. Well, he's more than welcome here now. I mean, we know how to do things, and whether you're in Tennessee or whether you're in California or downtown Chicago. So it really is exciting, and I am just. As a matter of fact, we did a job application for a particular job, and one of the applicants, they came out of Texas, and she said, "Is this going to be a problem, or do I have to move there?" And I said, "If you meet the skill set, you're welcome here." I mean, it has opened up a whole new world for us. I'm really excited about it. We've got. You go to the next slide, please, Carl. We already talked about HERF funding, and HERF is the acronym for nonprofit universities. I forgot, Brad, what did you call it? The CRM or something?
Yeah, it's just another tranche. Same bill, just a different tranche.
Stimulus funds had all kinds of different names out there, but the HERF funding, in our case, we struggled a little bit on how to actually spend that because we didn't have any. We had continuous enrollment. We were back in seat in all of fiscal 21 and this fiscal year, and we had just from a very maybe 1 month in the early days of the pandemic where the online or the in-seat students were sent home. So we had to get creative on the HERF funding, but that was pretty easy to do. I mean, we encouraged staff to buy equipment that they needed for the home office, and we bought like in our music program, we had students that were sharing a flute or a tuba or trombone or something, so we bought other ones so they were sharing. And, we did the equipment purchases like was already described. And in our situation, we really did have to increase campus security quite a bit because in the early days of the pandemic, the crime was going on. I mean, not violent crime, but property trespassing. We just, the local police department would, we'd call the police department. We have this issue. They come out, they give the guy a ticket, and then they'd say, well, we can't put him in prison or jail because it's COVID, and so it got to be really kind of a real problem in the early days of COVID. But we live in a large metro area, and you got to expect that. So the campus spent quite a bit on increasing security, and it's not a problem now. But out of respect for time, Carl, you've got 4 minutes left to wrap it up.
Well, no, that's great, and I really like your perspective on you're seeing this as an opportunity actually to change. So many institutions, years ago would say remote work, forget about it. You have to be on campus and you got to report here every day. And then suddenly the pandemic forced that situation to change, and there's a different perspective, on remote work. And I think there was a lot of concern about productivity and attending to what had to be done. But it turns out that it's been very successful for quite a few people. And it's interesting how you're looking at, that as an opportunity for the retention of your employees, so you have now opportunity to get those qualified employees because you're going to allow the remote learning and working. So that's a good opportunity, and that actually helps. So it's a struggle because I'm sure you're dealing with the same things that Marty's dealing with and Brad at their institutions, whether it's 10,000 students or a few thousand students. You need to have all the same compliance, all the same tools, all the same systems, and all the same issues. So I want to thank all three of my panelists today. You provided some good insight. Typically what I do after this is we try to aggregate the information together, and we take some of the poll questions and the feedback that you've put together, and we'll put together a brief or a summary and get that out to you, because I think there's some very good points here. And you've addressed the situation as is with finance, and not just technology, but all areas of the institutions that everybody has, whether it's a K-12 or a college or a university. Everybody is dealing with very similar issues. I love the comments on the collaborative efforts and the work that everyone is doing together increasingly, because we're definitely seeing many more institutions do that here at Campus Consortium as well. So thank you very much. We do have a few questions, but since we are running low on time, I will send those to our panelists, and we will follow up and get the answers out to everyone. And again, Brad, Marty, Dan, thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate it, and take care.